Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for coming today, and thank you very much to OSSF for inviting me here to speak. My name is Shane Coughlin, and I'm primarily representing Free Software Foundation Europe today as I speak about licensing compliance as business intelligence. I'll tell you a little bit about myself so you can understand why I'm speaking today on behalf of Free Software Foundation Europe. And I'll explain a little bit about Free Software Foundation Europe so you will also understand this organization, how it works, and why it has a special role in the development of free software governance. I myself am a political scientist and linguist, a specialist in military communication networks. I started working in free software primarily because free software was becoming very important. But the government model, the governance model, was still in its youth, in its infancy. In Europe, free software is now used by governments all over, in every country, in every aspect of our technology infrastructure. We use free software to deal with government communications, military communications, emergency services communications, and education. It was very important in this context that free software was understood, that it was carefully managed, and that it was safe. Experts like myself, engaging with policy around free software, quickly identified that the key issues were not technological. The key issues were based around legal control of free software. How does it work? Why does it work? How do we manage the transactions? Because of this, I decided to focus on building bridges in licensing management of free software to reduce confusion and to allow different parties, people from different countries, from different areas, be it commercial, governmental, or other, to work together and have the same understanding of what this technology means and why. Free Software Foundation Europe was a very interesting organization for me to join because it works on the policy level of free software. It tries to explain to people how and why free software exists, how and why it works, and what we need to do to see the value delivered by free software maximized. That's an important point because it's possible to actually adopt and use free software without making the most of it, without getting the best return on investment for you yourself, for your market area, and for society as a whole. So Free Software Foundation Europe is a non-governmental organization, or as it was called in Japan, a non-profit organization that works to explain the basic concepts of free software to business people, to politicians, and to individuals. It's an educational organization and sometimes a negotiation organization. Now, free software in Europe, I said it's important. I think it's worth looking at the figures to realize how important it is. There's been various research done around free software by various parties. Probably two sets of research are most critical. United Nations University, UNU Merit is the name used for it, did some research on behalf of the European Commission to value free software in terms of market adoption and actual worth. Now, the figures I have here are based on the market adoption, and they showed that free software had become one of the most important types of technology paradigm, technology use in Europe, with 32% of the industry expected to engage by 2011. And this is a figure which was growing exponentially. In other words, the adoption percentage will increase and increase and increase. And in economic terms, the value was estimated at 4% of the total European GDP by 2011, an enormous amount of money. These are significant figures. These figures are probably more important than thinking about UNU Merit's work in valuing free software, though they did that too. For instance, doing research into developmental costs, they estimated that the Linux kernel was worth over 800 million euro. That's the actual value of the code. Important research, not because UNU Merit did it, but because the European Commission asked for it. So these are the official European Union figures. These are the figures of what we think it is and what it's worth and what governmental policymakers use to make decisions about this. When you look at the pure business environment, though, you want to look at people like Gartner, because they do an awful lot of business intelligence analysis. And their research shows that the commercial adoption of free software is incredible. It eclipses any other approach to software we have ever seen. And it's also growing exponentially. In other words, it will saturate the market completely in the short to mid-term. Free software is gradually going everywhere. That's quite important because free software is very new and in some ways still forming itself. It's still becoming a solid approach to technology. The basic is known. It's software that everyone can use, study, share, and improve. But the governance model around it is still emerging. And that's unusual because research by Linux Foundation, well, they commissioned it, shows that this is a $50 billion market. A $50 billion market which is still building its governance model. Quite unusual. It's rare that you see such a large uptake and adoption of something when we're still working out how we manage it. So in Europe, the critical question is not, is free software good? The critical question is, how do we deal with it now that it's everywhere? One approach to that, something that the Free Software Foundation Europe decided to support, was to network the participants in free software. We found that a lot of people were making use of it for various reasons, to save money, to increase productivity, to share development cost, whatever reason. A lot of people were adopting but not communicating. Given that legal approaches were critical to free software, that this approach to technology relies on licensing to allow people to understand the rules and the boundaries and the obligations, the first and major important step, in our view, was to allow the legal professionals in the areas of adoption to get to know each other. So we created the European Legal Network. This network provides an informal and private environment for the professionals to speak informally and off the record, to share information, to learn from each other, and through cooperation, gradually produce common documents and knowledge for everyone. So the European Legal Network started as a relatively small group of legal professionals, some from non-profit, non-governmental organizations like Free Software Foundation Europe, and some from large corporations, and a few from law firms. The network quickly grew to its current standing of over 230 members across 27 countries and 4 continents, and is now the largest structure for legal discourse and mutual support in the world for free software. It's an interesting phenomenon because when we started the European Legal Network, we envisioned it being useful to get people in Europe on the same page, to get people to understand in Europe how free software worked, what licenses there were, what the licenses meant, and to bring the knowledge to a common level. Quite frankly, we didn't expect everyone in the world to want to join and to share knowledge. It's great that they did, and we're very, very positive about future growth, especially in places like Asia, where a great deal of free software adoption is happening, and a great deal of experience is being built in a very practical way by deploying products in the market. The fact is that all technology procurement in the world can now be affected by free software, no matter what you're looking at, whether it's servers, embedded technology, mobile technology, anything now can be free software related. It can be based on it, it can be built by it. You can't really be sure of where you're going to meet it. The only thing you can be sure of is that you will meet free software if you make anything which contains software, or you use anything that contains software. So that means that the critical thing right now is dealing with the fact that free software is everywhere, and it will become more and more and more visible as the years pass. So we need to find best practice approaches for companies to deal with free software, to deal with the obligations and the licenses to make sure they don't have legal exposure, and from a different perspective, to make sure that companies make the most of free software, to make sure that organizations engaging with free software actually get to use it properly. That's something I mentioned a few minutes ago, the idea that people can actually use free software without getting the full benefit. The reason my talk is about licensing compliance as business intelligence is because free software is not really about technology, and it ultimately isn't about law. It's about having something, a resource, that we can use very effectively and creating rules to allow that use. Software is an intangible creative good. It's a difficult product. It's a bit like a novel that actually solves problems. Free software is an approach to dealing with software that understands how software works and makes the most of it. When we are using free software, we're using software that is licensed explicitly in a way that allows flexibility. This flexibility has great potential. On its own, free software is not going to make you richer. It's not going to make better products, but it provides the potential to do so. Therefore, our challenge is to turn that potential into something useful, to develop best practice, to reduce potential liability, and to increase productivity. Now, free software, when you talk about it in a business context, is not perfect in that it doesn't come there as a magical gift that will always be helping you. Free software is an approach to software. It's an approach to using a tool. That's all. And like any approach, if misunderstood or incorrectly applied, or even influenced by factors outside of your control, it can lead to problems. And there are issues in using free software. There are certain risks involved in free software. These risks normally are based on two common problems, that people either don't read the licenses or don't follow the licenses. Very simple issues, but issues that cause a lot of headaches. I think it's worth noting that these type of problems are not isolated to free software, that whether you use free software or proprietary software, you will run into these types of issues. It's just that because free software has such potential and sounds so exciting that everyone can easily adopt it, people sometimes get a little surprised that when they adopt it, they might make a mistake and get in trouble. So yes, there are potential problems in using free software, And our best practice needs to take that into account. We need to consider it carefully. Luckily, the resolution to these problems is as simple as the statement of the problems. To use free software, you read the licenses and you follow the licenses. It's that simple. The fundamental concept is simple. When you come to the real world and you're dealing with a supply chain, of course, it's not quite that easy. It's not quite that easy because there is human error, because there is misunderstanding, especially across language barriers, and because sometimes you don't know what your supplier is doing, and you don't know what their subcontractor is doing, or their supplier is doing. And if at any point, anywhere in the chain, someone ignores the license, it can come back to cause a problem for you. So our best practice for free software is all based on the simple proposition that we're going to read the license and follow the terms. But the implementation is a little bit complex, a little bit more complex. Not hugely complex, but a little bit more. It's all about process management. You know, we need to have processes to show that we understand the obligations of the licenses.